Good morning everyone and welcome to an Oz Cyclone Chasers update this morning, 29th of December 2013. This one will be a brief one because we couldn't issue one yesterday due to some technical difficulties with our software. So hopefully this one we can issue and get it to you, and we'll have a more in-depth update later on tonight. So, well, not too much has changed since our last update, so it's not that big a deal that it didn't come out yesterday because it's almost a carbon copy in terms of what we're expecting to happen. We're expecting this Category 1 cyclone to eventually become Category 3, hit the coast somewhere around the Karratha area, and then continue on inland, and likely to maintain a fair bit of intensity as it heads inland. Now, exactly when it does that is going to be very important for the storm surge perspective, because we do have a high tide in the Karratha, Onslow to Port Hedland region at about 9 p.m. tomorrow, and the high tide mark is at around the 5-meter mark. So if we add another couple of meters for a storm surge, you're looking at an overall, if this hits at high tide, that high tide becomes a 7 or 8 meter high tide instead of a 5-meter high tide. So it is significant in terms of that. At this stage, the Bureau's tracking has this hitting at 2 a.m. on the Tuesday, which will make it hit in a low tide time frame. So that would be a great case scenario. However, some of the model guidance maintains it hitting at around that 9 p.m. WA time or 10 p.m. WA time, which isn't good news if it does that. So once again, remember, with a storm surge, what we're looking for is that the water will rise above the expected level at that time frame by a certain amount, and normally with a Cat 3, you're probably looking at a couple of meters storm surge with the system. So the storm surge will only occur to the east of the Eyes crossing. So at this stage, the Bureau has this crossing just to the east of Karratha, and most model guidance tends to agree around that Karratha region. So while you might experience the strongest winds and potentially destructive winds all around the system centre, the storm tide will only be limited to the area right in the centre and also to the east of the centre, because that's when the winds are pushing the water onto the land, whereas on to the west of the cyclone, the winds will be coming off the land and pushing in into the water. So therefore, we're not going to see those extreme rises in the water level. A very similar track from the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre, and we can see that the system pushes basically in the southwest, and then as it approaches land, it pushes in a more south-southwest direction, and then eventually hits the coast. This one particularly has it moving just to the east of the Bureau's track map, but it's still sort of in that Port Hedland to Karratha area, and closer to Karratha than it is to Port Hedland. Look, that's probably a best case scenario, especially when we're looking at storm surges, because the surge will be, the really high surge will be limited to the area west of Port Hedland if it crosses in the area that the Bureau expect it to and the JTWC expect it to. So that's a really good best case scenario type of thing. Whereas if it crossed, say, just to the west of Karratha or just to the west of Port Hedland, that's not a very good scenario. So on satellite, the system has started to improve its signature, and we are starting to see an actual cyclonic type circulation on satellite too. We've got some banding in here, and we've got the centre of circulation in there somewhere. So it's not a very well defined system just yet, but it is becoming better defined, and once it starts to tighten up, we should start to see intensification at a more standard rate. It has been very slow to intensify just because it's been very broad, and we mentioned in our last update that the thunderstorms were very disorganized, disjointed, weren't forming around a certain central location. Now they're starting to do so. So once that continues to consolidate that center, we're going to see an intensification at a reasonable rate. Sea surface temperatures are not an issue, so we're not even going to talk about them. They're very, very warm, so there's no issue until it gets probably south of Exmouth. If it decides to move that far west, which it probably won't, the sea surface temperature is not an issue. Moisture too is becoming less of an issue for this system. It seems to be attached to a lot of moisture around around just generally in the atmosphere. So we were a little bit concerned with some very dry air pushing off the Pilbara. That has since moved on. We've got some moist air advecting into the region, and so we shouldn't see dry air entrainment as an issue on this system's approach to the coast. Vertical wind shear, the change of direction and speed of the winds with height in the atmosphere, has decreased over the system, and you can see that the system is now developing pretty well underneath an upper level anticyclone, and what this is going to allow is excellent outflow for the system. So all the convection, so all of the thunderstorm activity, all of the waste activity will be able to push out and push off the center of the system, and so the system will be allowed to regrow new and stronger thunderstorms in the center of it. So you can see in its track, it's really got 5 to 10 knots of wind shear, and probably just increasing slightly as it heads right into, or once it heads into land as well, but by that stage it's too late. So if we look at the UK Met model, and this is one of the major reasons why the Bureau probably shifted their track too far to the east yesterday. The UK Met was predicting the system to push in a far more easterly direction and actually cross the coast right around Port Hedland. But overall, the UK Met is not suggesting that. Overall, the UK Met continues to keep the track well west into and around the Karratha area. The other reason that the Bureau may have changed the track is the GFS data from the GFS model, which also had the system hitting around Port Hedland. Once again, that may be slightly too far to the east. The other issue is the European model, and the European model overall did start to shift a lot of the model members a little bit further to the east, and you can see as we head in this area here, we've got a lot more model members hitting between Karratha and Hedland now. So overall, the models have decided that the system may track a little bit further to the east. There's a little bit more variability in the guidance, so we can see here the spread in terms of landfall locations is quite large again. It wasn't this large a day ago, and so that's why there's a little bit more error margin in the track forecast. But still, Karratha really does look like it's in the firing line for the crossing, maybe just east or just west of that. Remembering just west of that would be probably worst case scenario for Karratha, just because of the storm surge. Looking at the Bureau's access model output, and we can see that the Bureau's access model has this system hitting right around Karratha as a Category 3 by about 5 AM WA time. So this one has it a little bit later than the Bureau's track map hitting the coast. This is the Bureau of Meteorology's local computer model. So it does have a fairly high resolution, so it does have a reasonable success rate in terms of its effectiveness and reliability. The other thing to note here in this model is the amount of rainfall falling right along the coastal strip, and you can see here the purple signifying well over 100 millimeters, but all of that coastal strip, basically from Broome southwards, is going to experience these northerly winds pushing on and this convergent flow hitting the coast and creating some fairly heavy rainfall, over 20 millimeters throughout basically the entire coastline from Broome southwards, and then really in the vicinity and just to the east of the centre we're going to see some extreme rainfalls in this particular system. So we can see, looking at the latest GFS modelling in higher resolution, that we do have this tropical cyclone approaching the Karratha area. But the good thing with the GFS is, once again, it maintains or slows down the movement of the system and crosses the system early in the morning between sort of the 1 AM or 12 midnight through to about 3 AM, 4 AM WA time, right in the vicinity of Karratha. You can see the eye there just hitting Karratha or just to the east of Karratha. Pretty well exactly what the Bureau of Meteorology have on their track map. And once again, that purple area just to the east of the system is where the strongest onshore winds are going to be. And so that is the issue with our storm surge. So you can see that places like Port Hedland are still going to be in some fairly strong winds, maybe not the maximum winds, but definitely strong enough to create a surge of water to come onto the coast, and definitely strong enough to blow a couple of roofs off if they're not structurally sound. So just because it's not going to hit Hedland, it is a large system, and something we mentioned in our last update, it is a large system, so it's not a system that you can say, all right, it's going to hit Karratha, so we're not going to cop anything out of it. So just be aware of that if you live particularly east of the system, where we are stressing this thing about east of the system. Now, if we look at the European model, Monday at 2 p.m, at 5 p.m, at 7 p.m, and at 10 p.m. This is the problem. The European model has the system hitting the coast just to the east of Karratha at 10 p.m. Once again, the issue becomes storm surge because of the high tide, about 5 meters at about 9 to 10 p.m. in that area. So once again, if you have a look at the wind field here, we've got a fairly large wind field, so we're going to see gales over a large stretch of coastline as the system hits land. So even though it might hit close to Karratha, you're going to see gales probably from Onslow all the way east of Port Hedland, all the way through to around Pardue. You're going to see gale force winds. You might even see destructive winds all the way from west of Karratha through to almost Port Hedland. So it is a situation where it is a large system. You need to be aware that it is a large system, and the effects will not be limited just to the coastal crossing point. Now after that, it pushes southeast very, very rapidly, so it's not expected to hug the coast like Tropical Cyclone Rusty did, and then push in a south-southeast or southeast direction across basically most of the continent, and we'll talk more about that once the system crosses the coast. But overall, you're still going to see gale force winds a long way inland. In fact, you're probably going to see destructive force winds. I mean, look at this. It's west of Newman, well west of Newman, and Newman's still expecting 40 to 50 knot winds out of it. So it's certainly a system that is going to survive. Maybe not as a tropical cyclone, but it's going to survive as a very intense depression for a long period of time. All right, folks, thanks very much for watching this morning. We'll try and update you again tonight, especially if there's anything new that we do need to stress to you. Have a good day.